Well, as we get closer, excitement's building about the potential of Tuesday. I think to say that a meeting like this serves as possibly a very important milestone, really in this country's history. When I was honored to be put into this job in July of '09, this is one of the aspects that I think was really important, calling for the Prime Minister, calling for the Crown. I think that's the appropriate way to describe what needs to happen, is for the Crown to meet directly with First Nations. I think even the recent focus on the community of Attawapiskat, I had the privilege of traveling up there and spending time with the community, is this pattern of sort of lurching from conflict to conflict. Recent history, whether it's major events like Oka, we just finished the 20-year reflection on that event. Out west where I come from, we had Gustafson Lake years ago. We've got Caledonia here in Ontario. We've got stories like the ones coming out of Attawapiskat that are not alone. And it's a pattern that we've just been, for whatever reason, and I say us collectively as a country, unable to break. And so this meeting and the planning that's gone into this meeting on Tuesday certainly builds on decades of work, reams of reports going back to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the pursuit of First Nations control of First Nations education going back to the 70s. And it's an opportunity to really renew the relationship with the Crown, that the Prime Minister will be there, that the Governor General is now confirmed. This, I think, signals that there's a sense of cautious optimism about the potential of what this meeting could do, which hopefully is to set forward a break to this pattern whereby governments unilaterally determine for First Nations what's best in their lives. This goes all the way back to the Indian Act. It goes back to the residential school era. So in this, we have a Prime Minister who rose in the House of Commons and offered an apology to, amongst all of the survivors, that included my late grandmother, who was still with us at that time. I was with her in the House of Commons when the apology was uttered, and she says, "You know, grandson, they're just starting to see us." And it was a really remarkable, I think, sentiment to receive from my late grandmother. So she was very encouraging that we've got to continue this work. She certainly, like so many of our elders, continue to encourage us in the area of education, that this continues to be something that the elders say we must put some emphasis and focus on. Residential schools was under the guise of education, and it sought to remove our people from their culture, their language, their families, their territories, and has had such, as we're learning in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, such a deep and lasting and hurtful traumatic experience, and helped to further deepen the gap between First Nations and the rest of Canada. And so I think this meeting is not being pursued as being a day to solve all the problems, but it's being seen as an opportunity to be both practical but ambitious, to be focused but set and chart a new path forward where we move away from the unilateral type of experiences that we've had, and to do as the Auditor General said, Sheila Fraser, to do as the UN Declaration says, to do as the treaties originally said, and that is that we've got to jointly design a way forward, and we have to start working together. So I guess in conclusion, by way of opening thoughts, I'm hopeful that Tuesday would be the opportunity to be such a day, but that we would see some progress in areas like education, including as soon as this coming budget cycle. That we would build on reports that have already been submitted over the years, including a Senate report. The National Panel report is coming up early next month, we understand. And so it's an opportunity then to do as the Declaration says, get on with jointly designing a way forward. Education is explicitly noted in the Declaration as one element where Indigenous peoples should have the right to design a future together with the state. And so we have this chance to do this. And in my view, given the challenges in the labor market this country faces over the next couple of decades, the youthfulness of our population, I think it's a perfect match for us to recognize that reconciliation requires action, and some of the first steps need to be in areas like education. But make no mistake, the challenges are large. infrastructure, housing, water, issues of murdered and missing women, the vulnerability of our communities, the lack of sense of safety and security in homes filled with mold. And so absolutely, it's broad, it's complex, so I'm hoping that we would, in fact, renew the original relationship this coming Tuesday and set out, a plan for real change, and that we would be seeking commitments that there be an ongoing effort to do so. Well, two quick thoughts. First of all, there are communities that are already beyond the Indian Act, who forged through negotiations with the Crown and no longer under the auspices of the Indian Act. There's lots of examples. We have lots of examples of communities that strive for, through being at negotiation tables right now. One of the challenges that we have is the courts have pointed to the unfairness of the negotiations process. The declaration suggests that we need to really address how land issues are settled, and the rate and pace of that change for everyone's benefit needs to improve. So that's one of the specific pursuits going into this gathering, is that we would jointly design a much better way, more fair and equitable way to address the resolution of the land question. And the Indian Act, I can point to one specific example where K-12 education is still under the auspices of the Federal Minister of what was Indian Affairs. Now the name has changed, but under an act that everyone agrees does not serve the interests of our people nor the country. And it makes no sense for that to be the case. Since the 70s, First Nations have been pursuing First Nations control of First Nations education. And we saw a real, I think, surge forward in the willingness to address educational challenges amongst First Nations in the 70s. So we went from what was in the early 60s a 95% failure rate under what was then the Hawthorne Report. It wasn't a success rate, it was a failure rate in the early 60s. And then in the early 70s, there was a great advancement in the area of education, and we surged to the high 40s in terms of graduation rates. It was tremendous success forward. We now have more post-secondary graduates than we've ever had in history. But there was a flattening in the will to really dig deep and address an issue like education, in part because it's still anchored in the Indian Act. And so now there's certainly a real desire that we give effect to First Nations control of First Nations education. And when I relate this to the treaty relationship, I look to the example of Treaty Number 3 right here in Ontario, where education was, in fact, for the Treaty 3 people, a deal breaker. If it wasn't in there, the supports for the children's education going forward, the First Nations weren't prepared to enter into that treaty. And so these treaties, as the courts have said, are as valid today as the day that they were entered into. The UN Declaration says that even if Canada wasn't a direct signatory, that they are a successor state and have a responsibility to live up to and honor and implement those treaties. That has not happened up till now. And so there is a desire that we return to the spirit and intent of areas like treaty. It's a tangible example of how it's anchored in the Indian Act. It makes no sense. And so you can see that the language here is more about moving beyond and implementing the nation-to-nation treaty relationship more than the notion of getting rid of anything. We have lots of pieces of legislation that aren't enacted on a day-to-day basis. And so this has to be about strengthening a relationship that's truly joint in nature. So that's the aspiration here. That's the reason why we'd be looking for a commitment, even expressed this coming Tuesday, that the government would be willing to jointly design a response to education, and that as early as this budget cycle would be prepared to match the resources required for the transformation needed in education. So I have a deep concern, obviously, about this, thinking about the kids that are in schools right now, and there is a sense of urgency that we move as rapidly as is possible on this. That's the reason for this notion that we can be both focused and ambitious at the same time.